Good evening, everyone, and we apologize for the slight delay in the start, but this is the May 4th meeting of the Vermont Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel. This is being done as a webcast, so just very briefly, members of the audience joining will be muted as they join. If you need to ask a question, you can just email me or text me at 802-272-1714 to say that you have a question. You don't have to write in the question at that point. There will be times during the meeting that we will open basically all of the connection lines, so people in the public will be free to ask questions. The way we're set up, the discussion between individual panelists should be unmuted. I see a number of people have muted themselves, but for the sake of background noise, if anyone, when you are not speaking, please mute yourself. We have, at this point, 40 different people connected to this presentation, so background noise will be a problem if we do not self-mute. With that, I will turn the meeting over to the panel chair, Josh Unruh. Josh, I hope you're here and we can. Yeah, okay, you are here. And hopefully we can actually hear you at this point.
Hey, good evening, everybody. How are you? So the only thing that I need to change tonight is making an amendment to the agenda is our 815 status report on the Vermont NDCAP legislation. I'd like to move that to right prior to the NorthStar update on the VY site decommissioning. So that will move to 625 from 815. Scott State is going to join us if he hasn't joined us already, or maybe Dave Pearson will speak in his stead. I'm not sure yet. But they have an announcement regarding that legislation, so and they will not be able to be on the call to 8:15 to make that announcement. So we're going to move that forward if everybody's okay with that. So the next thing on the agenda is the introduction of panelists. I'm not terribly concerned about doing that, Anthony, unless that's something that we have to do. Because I think it's going to be fairly cumbersome to try to do through this format. Okay.
Well, it looks like I have a clear picture of who's on the meeting right now. So I will make a note of that. We pretty much have everyone. We have 15 panelists present right now. So
very good. So the next, go ahead.
Tony, can you tell us who's missing? That would maybe be just helpful.
Yeah, right now the only person I see missing is Paul Mark, the representative from the Massachusetts towns. For those of you who don't recall, our New Hampshire representative, Bob Gustafson, has retired, so he is. There is no one here from Vermont. I'm sorry, from New Hampshire. But right now, who I have on here is Bill Irwin, Bob Leach, Chris Campany, Corey Daniels, David Pearson, Emily Davis, Josh Unruh, June Tierney, Brett Long, Madeline Arms, Laura Sibilia, Sarah Coffey, and Chuck Schwer.
Thank you.
And Lissa Weinman.
Oh, yes, and Lissa. My apologies, Lissa. Yes, you're not showing up on the list.
Okay. Quick question.
Just for procedure's sake for this evening, if we do have to do a vote tonight, we are going to do it in alphabetical order. Tony sent out an email with that list in order. If we do end up doing a vote, I don't foresee us doing one, but if by chance we do one, it will be in alphabetical order based on that list Anthony emailed out earlier today. And somebody was trying to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was me. This is Emily. This is a question for Tony and Josh. How do we want to proceed with video call during the Skype meeting? Do you prefer us to, if we unmute ourselves to talk, do you also want to have video on like I have right now? Or what's the best way? What's the best thing? Those of us who can come in on video.
I would say the choice is yours. I think it would be better to have the video on because that will make for overall a better recording. But that is entirely up to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think at this point the only person we would not be able to see is Lissa.
Okay.
All right, so that being said, I started my video. All right, so what we need to do now is review and approve the January and February 2020 meeting minutes. Those were sent out for your review. So I will entertain a motion on both of those. And again, as we're voting, it will be in alphabetical order.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, just so folks know, what I had sent out on the meeting minutes, there were some minor changes. On the January meeting minutes, there was a change, two changes on page 4, line 16 of page 4, to complete the sentence, the words "are being held" was added. And down on line 28, Doctor was added in front of Bill Irwin's name. Also on page 3, this is something that I had put in, but I had neglected to note because of a typo on page 3, line 33. I have changed the word "actually" to "currently." Those are the only changes that we've had on those.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Lissa.
I wanted to suggest that we add a link or include the comments that were made by Ray Shaddis for that February meeting about how the Maine Yankee expenses operated. Those were presented at the meeting, and they're also on the NDCAP site, but they should also be reflected in the minutes.
Okay, I thought I had that in the minutes. So you're referring to the February minutes at this point,
yes,
rather than the January. Okay, I'm.
I looked for them and I didn't see them, but if they're there, that's fine. But I did not see them in there.
Okay,
so.
well, I'll tell you what. I will. Yeah, okay. If you go to page 4 of the February minutes, what I have noted beginning on line 13 is Clay Turnbull outlined that the written comments that Ray Shaddis provided to the panel on behalf of New England Coalition. These comments may be viewed at the NDCAP website. So if you would prefer, Lissa, I can put a direct link there to the comments themselves.
Yes, I think that would be good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other revisions to either January or February? Hearing and seeing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as corrected.
So moved. Bob Leach.
Is there a second?
I second.
So moved and seconded. Does everybody have the voting list? If not, I will call out your name and ask for a yay or nay. Maybe that will be easier. So I will just do that. Let's just make it easy. Maddie Arms.
Yes, yay.
Chris Campney.
Yes.
Sarah Coffey.
Yes.
Corey Daniels.
Yes.
Emily Davis,
Yes.
Dr. Irwin,
Yes.
Corey, I think that's you.
Dr. Irwin, we can't hear you. Please unmute yourself and vote.
Yes.
Thank you. Bob Leach,
Yes.
Brett Long,
Yes.
Mark McDonald,
Oh, I missed him. He is not here that I can see.
oh, okay. David Pearson,
Yes.
Chuck Shore,
Yes.
Laura Sibilia,
Yes.
June Tierney,
Yes.
Josh Unruh says yes. Lissa Wyman.
Yes.
Okay. So we are unanimous as corrected for both January and February. So as I mentioned prior to the start of the meeting, we bumped up the status report on the Vermont NDCAP legislation. David Pearson, I believe you're speaking, or maybe Scott State is on the line, I'm not sure. Whomever is speaking regarding that particular line item, please do it now.
Josh, I believe Scott's on the line.
Yeah, can you hear me, Josh?
Yes, sir.
Good. I just wanted to just give a brief update. I know that this particular legislation was obviously of great interest to the NDCAP, and I know that during the process of debates and committee meetings in the legislature, this had been making progress, and then with the COVID issue, it got set aside. And so what NorthStar would like to do is be a good corporate citizen and make the assumption that this bill would have been passed in normal course. And as such, we would like to make the contribution that was in the bill on July 1st as if the bill had passed. And I spoke with Representative Sibilia earlier today and let her know that was our interest. I think she spoke with Commissioner Tierney, and I don't know the process, but what NorthStar would like to do is just find a way to live up to the obligation that is in that legislation, and presumably at some point the legislation will be taken back up again and be put in place. But that's really all I had to say about that particular matter. We do want to have a positive relationship, obviously, in Vermont, and we've been very pleased with the year plus a few months that we've been working in Vermont, and as such, that's the commitment we're making.
So, Representative Sibilia, do you have anything on this, or Commissioner Tierney?
Yep.
Go ahead.
And I'm happy to defer to, not defer. Commissioner Tierney will speak for herself. Just a quick status update on where the legislation is. It did pass the House. It is over in the Senate. I know the Vice Chair has inquired as to the likelihood of it passing. She may want to update. It would be my sense that it probably will pass at some point this year. I don't know when. I doubt that it's going to be in the before July 1 stack, but who knows? And I appreciate NorthStar coming forward in this manner. And I think that's all I have to say. I don't know if the Commissioner or Lissa have anything else to add in that regard.
This is June Tierney. I much appreciate the gesture from the company. Representative Sibilia did contact me about it earlier today. What I expressed to her was that we certainly would try to find a way to make that work. There can be legal hurdles at times having to do with where money goes, who receives it, and so forth. So we will certainly run those to ground. And if we can accept the gesture, we will. And if we can't, we will remember that NorthStar made the gesture.
All right, very good. Representative Coffey, do you have anything to add to this one?
Sure. Thank you, Josh. I just want to add to the appreciation that I have for NorthStar for stepping forward and giving this commitment and in the first place, and in light of the COVID-19 situation in the legislature, I really appreciate Scott, you coming forward and making this commitment. So thank you, and I'm optimistic that the Commissioner Tierney will figure out a way to accept the money. Thank you.
Very good. So I'm watching kind of the IM conversations that are going on, and Dr. Irwin and Chuck Schuer have a good suggestion to kind of help me through this meeting. If you have a question, which we are going to hold all the questions until after each presentation. So NorthStar's presentation is up next. If you have a question on that presentation, please wait until they're done and send a little note in the comment or in the IM so I can do it by so I know who all has a comment to make and I can call on you appropriately. That way we're not trying to talk over each other. So if you all understand where the IM feature is, it's in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Looks like a little cartoon talk box. Click on that, type a message, and say, I have a question. I will call on you, and we will be able to get through our questioning a little bit easier after each presentation. So if that makes sense to everybody, we will proceed with the NorthStar update on the decommissioning.
Okay, I don't know, Corey, are you doing that?
Yes, Tony, I'm here. I'm ready to start.
Okay. Okay, can everyone see the NorthStar initial slide right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, terrific.
All right, good evening, everyone. This update obviously is for 5/4/2020. I know a good part of the conversation tonight will be the financial reporting, so this is a fairly truncated slide deck tonight, and we try to keep it at 15 minutes. Tony, next slide, please.
It is up on my end. There may be a lag on your end.
There is definitely a lag because it has not switched.
Interesting.
Is it possible for Corey to give Corey control? Does Corey have the presentation?
Yeah, Corey, you should be able to request control if you want to try that. There should be a request. Since you're a presenter at this point, there should be a request. A request button at the top of the Skype interface.
And I believe Corey would need to be showing it from his computer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm operating this from a tablet as well, so I don't know if I have that option.
Yeah, I'm sorry, folks. I am out of it's showing on my end here as the presentation. I'm not sure why it's not coming up. Wait.
I'm seeing the present. This is Chris. I'm seeing the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This may be a function of individual internet connections, is what we're running into.
Chris, what exactly are you seeing? Are you seeing the diagram of the plant?
I am.
Yeah, that is slide 1, if I'm correct, right, Tony?
Yeah, and I had scrolled down to slide 2.
I'm seeing slide 2.
Okay.
Yep, me too.
Simple priorities is slide 2, correct?
Yes.
Okay, it just moved on.
Just moved for me too.
Okay, I don't know why it didn't move the first dozen times.
Tony, it's Chris. In case folk don't know, in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, the second little icon, it has a arrow pointing at a symbol of a person. That's where you choose the presentation view, or whatever layout you want.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Okay, I know what Chris is talking about. In the upper right-hand corner, yeah, why don't you try switching to content view? And that should give you the slide.
I think everybody's on the second slide at this point. Corey, if you want to keep going, let's do it.
Yeah, let's try it, Tony. Unfortunately, I don't have that menu item, but second slide with simple priorities. Obviously, nothing's changed with safety. We're going to talk about safety and performance a little further on in the presentation. But it's a good reminder, the radiological and nuclear component of this slowly goes away, but the industrial environmental aspect of it remains fairly high. And we're going to demonstrate that we've had good performance for a full year straight. We just wanted to show a graphic with that. So you can go to the next slide, please.
This is
project schedule. You guys have seen this slide before. The data shifted slightly with the large component removal, mostly due to the reactor vessel segmentation work, and sliding a little bit to the right. But with that, we've made great gains with our turbine and steam plant removals and some of our demolition projects. Overall, the schedule's well on track. We have very high confidence we'll be able to complete it well ahead of 2030. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we were going to talk about safety. We've now worked 350,000 person hours with no recordable injuries on site. Pretty good by most industrial standards, very good by decommissioning and deconstruction efforts. We continue to have good regulatory performance. We've had no cited violations in all of 2019 and so far for all of 2020. As I mentioned, our production overall is on track, and we already talked a little bit about the reactor removal project. We're actually commencing a second shift this week with that project group to gain some efficiencies and improve our usage of the reactor building crane. And we're not seeing any slippage in that schedule currently, so we believe we have good control of that. We have some of the harder projects out of the way, which I'll show you in some of the photographs upcoming. Next slide, please. All right, this is a familiar graphic, and again, a little reminder for the arrows along the bottom. It kind of describes the manner in which the reactor vessel is taken apart. It pretty much works from the top down. The progress along the left-hand margin, I won't read all the slides to you, but the more important part is that the steam separator is now done. As I mentioned in the upper right-hand corner, that's a very complicated job. And now that we have those components removed, broken down, and packaged, we're moving through the next couple of steps, most significant of which is the core shroud, along with feed water sparters, and those cutting operations are in progress right now. Next slide, please. So one more photo of the top half of the steam separator after it was cut up and pulled out of the reactor and slid over before we could segment it. Next slide. Obviously 4 photographs here, so a little bit more complicated visual of what you're looking at. In the upper left-hand corner, now the shroud head is being cut up. And that's with the portal cutting system. You can see the next one over to the right working clockwise. That basket is one of the containers that we use to slide into a larger cylindrical red waste container. And you're going to see a few more photos of those type of baskets in the next couple of slides. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can see our portal cuddle system being removed from the dryer separator pit. And that was for maintenance activities. We actually set up a little tent and worked on that equipment and retooled it for the work that it was being used for next. And then you can see on the bottom right-hand corner it being lowered back into the water. So a pretty elaborate operation to pull all that equipment out, tool it up, check it out, perform maintenance on it, put it back into service. Next slide, please. So back to the steam separator. These are some of the photos that show the final segmentation efforts for the steam separator. In the photo that I showed you first of the steam separator in its entirety, you could see all the cyclones sticking up. The segmentation bandsaw being placed into the water in the upper right-hand corner, guiding those baskets through the transfer canal back into the spent fuel pool. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see what those baskets look like with the individual cyclones stacked in them. And that bright light you see in the middle of the photo is just a reflection from a light above. It's not anything exciting like underwater welding, but I know that might get a couple questions, so that is all that is. Next question. Next slide, please. So those are the big items happening on the refuel floor with the vessel segmentation. The other activities of significance are happening in the turbine building. Now that the turbine is gone and we're working our way down through the steam lines, you get a little bit of context for the level of effort into the cutting operations. A lot of physical hands-on work. We're moving small pipes to get to big pipes, slowly lowering those into place until we can get them staged and prepped for transportation. Next slide. So you're going to see quite a few photos demonstrating what I just described. You can see the plastic laid down on the floor. We pick an area that we want to go after. This happens to be near the turbine control valves, which were under the top front end of the turbine, where all the big steam lines come up and used to supply the steam to the turbine itself. You can see the workers placing and holding the smaller steam lines while they're manually cutting them. You get an idea for debris being stacked up, waiting transportation. Starting on the bottom row in photos, you get an idea. Those are 18 and in some cases 36-inch steam lines in the overhead that are being cut up and partitioned and pulled out of the turbine building. You get an idea for how big those control valves are. Some of those valves weigh well over 5 tons each. If you look carefully, you can see the legs and people in a suit sitting on top of one of those valves, dismantling one partially before we cut it out. And then you can see some of the loading operations with the turbine building crane being staged to place in a gondola. Next slide, please. So we have several small teams working in concert, but independently. Part of the way we've managed some of the COVID controls was to redistribute the work with smaller dedicated teams. You see a couple of folks going after the feed water system, a large supply pipe and valve, prepping that for removal. And behind them, you can see one of the feed water heaters, which is close up on the right-hand side after we used a diamond wire saw to segment that in half. Those feed water heaters are too large to place in a single rail car, so we cut those up, rigged them out, and stacked them into the rail cars individually. So the inside of that heat exchanger, about 10,000 tubes inside of that, gives you an idea of how much material is inside of one of those. Next slide, please. So with that feed water system and all the heaters, of which there are 10, actually 4 pairs of the heaters have already been removed and in the process of being shipped. The 2 remaining heaters are built into the sides of the main condenser, which we're maintaining as a storage volume. So that'll be one of the later things that gets removed. but all the other feed water heaters have been cut out. You get an idea for what we consider a manageable size piece, usually on the order of 5 to 10 tons. And you can get an idea for just how thick the piping is around some of those turbine valves and the feed water lines. The bottom row, you can see the steam lines being worked from the top down, and you can see the segmented components of the feed water heaters being lifted and loaded into gondola rail cars. Pretty significant material handling operations, which again, I'd like to remind folks we've had near perfect safety performance and no recordable accidents with all those activities. These are unconventional rigging actions. We're being extremely diligent with our engineering controls. We have a dedicated on-site PE engineer to make sure that we are performing those activities correctly and safely. And we have an experienced team of riggers who know the equipment here on site, making sure all that equipment comes out of there safely. Next slide. So with all that material coming out, you get an idea, we're moving about 3 rail cars out here a week. We're looking to ramp that up a little bit. And with the current controls in place, our production rates are slowly going up. We expect that to go up by quite a bit with the demolition that's happening with the exterior buildings. But we sent almost 100 shipments today. Actually, it'll be over 100 today. I believe we sent 4 rail cars out of here today. I won't read the slide to you, but the total volumes and weights are significant. For those who may not have audio, we've sent over 10 million pounds of material out of here and over 147 carries of activity. We've upped our rail car inventory by about 18 rail cars with the amount of time it takes to get them all the way across the country, transload and offload them and get them returned. Now we have no holdups with our rail transport capability, and we should see pretty strong movement out of the site going forward as the summer months pick up. Next slide. So that's kind of what's happening inside the buildings for radiological decommissioning. Now onto the non-rad side, the characterization remediation efforts. A lot of progress has been made with the help from our friends in the state. We've got the review complete of the site investigation report. We received their comments and input. We've got revisions and changes in process. And the number of AOCs, not all of the changes and adjustments of those were significant. A lot of that was detail and specific sample data and the way it was formatted. You'll notice of the AOCs 3, 7, and 8, the South Warehouse, the fuel storage tank, and the transformers, I have those highlighted. That's because we have corrective action plans under review and out for public comment for those small remediation efforts in those areas. What we tend to call a dig and haul, basically, where we plan to remove a set location of soil and sample the peripheries, validate that we got everything out of there, and then close those areas out one at a time. So next slide, please. As mentioned, so we have the 3 remediation plans so far designated and submitted, or designed and submitted to A&R. That went out on the 13th of April. They've been working through all the comments and issues on those and got a great turnaround considering all the constraints on them from the pandemic impacts. We've completed our 4th round of quarterly groundwater sampling. We've got no new source terms or anything significant identified that we didn't know about. We have more groundwater sampling planned for this month. We'll coordinate with A&R and ATC representatives to make that happen. We've also drilled a couple of additional wells with input from the state on where that would make sense so we can get good sample data going forward. And the annual report is being finalized right now, and it should be ready for submission any day. I think it's just awaiting final signatures. Next slide. So we revised and completed our SWEP plan. We had some mold abatement operations that we had done in one of the old outbuilding structures where we walked through into the plant side of the site. That was all cleaned up and validated. No further activities required. The ongoing iterative process of validating that all the samples for the buildings that we plan to demolition with the state's input is ongoing. We submitted to, got concurrence from the Agency of Natural Resources on the building characterization for removal of the warehouse and the AOG structures. A good portion of the warehouse came down today. That work started in earnest this morning and will continue on the rest of this week. And then I'm sure the debris loadout will take some time once it's all down and separated out. And we had our bi-weekly call with the state agencies today also. And those continue to bear fruit and be quite useful for keeping us aligned going forward with the remediation efforts. Next slide. So you saw this slide before, the previous NDCAP. It's just a reminder. The large building on the left side with the red circle around it is where we started. That's the warehouse and maintenance office building. The AOG structure just to the right of that will happen a little later, where we're going to get the other building down first. Because it's a metal skin steel frame building, it will require very little effort to knock down with heavy equipment. The AOG structure on the other end is going to take a little more work. The concrete walls at the base of that structure, about 7 feet thick, was designed to contain a hydrogen explosion, and it's a pretty robust structure. And we have a very detailed plan on how we're going to dismantle that and get the material out of here as well. But both of those are prepped and ready to go. Next slide. So trying to stay under my 15 minutes. I'll open it up to questions at this time.
Okay, so going through my list, Emily Davis, you have the first question for Corey, please.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Corey, for that. I have a question on the corrective action plans. Did paw through on the environmental notice bulletin and looked at those plans. And under what Haley and Aldrich had filed under Section 4, the corrective action plans, there's a couple of sentences that I'm hoping you can elaborate on, and I don't know if this is a question for you or your consultants or A&R, but it says, because of the expedited schedule, NorthStar understands that for smaller areas of contamination, it is more efficient to proceed with remediation without completing a feasibility study to compare remedial options. In these cases, Vermont A&R will be notified in advance for approval. I'm curious about I don't doubt that that's not the best way to move through with this, and I appreciate the expedited schedule, but I'm hoping that you can elaborate a little bit more on what else we get out of completing that feasibility study, that there's a judgment that that's not necessary to move through with this. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, Emily, I understand your question. More than likely, one of the state representatives will be able to answer this more completely. But for some of these very small corrective action plans, the high rule is adjusted to effectively allow this interim performance of doing something like a dig and haul to remediate a small section where we clean it up and validate the perimeters and make sure that it's taken care of. But that is only one small part of the non-radiological decommissioning. It doesn't mean you're done forever with that. You still have to verify that if it extends in any direction, that it's completely taken care of. But as far as the feasibility study component of it, I think that's probably better left to either the experts with Haley and Aldrich or someone from the state to help fill in the gaps on that, because I'm probably going to give you a bogus answer.
Thank you. Is there anyone from the state that might be able to shed light on that?
This is Gerald Noyes from the Agency of Natural Resources. I had reviewed the corrective action plans and then filed them up on the environmental notice board. Mm-hmm. Our investigation and guidance document, or the rule for doing a site investigation, some of that is geared to complex sites where you might have a large release and it might not be immediately obvious how to clean up that release. In that case, a feasibility study might be in order to kind of identify the best cleanup method. These first three corrective action plans, one of them was basically contaminated soil in the vicinity of a fuel oil tank used for space heating. One of them, and I forget, I'll have to review it for the other two, but basically those were pretty clear small operations, and it was clearly the easiest way to do it is just to dig up this contaminated soil and ship it off site, since NorthStar has the disposal options in Texas and the heavy equipment for the digging, and there really wasn't any need to do a feasibility study to decide what is the best method to get rid of the contamination that was observed. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's the short answer there. But I did review what they had submitted in terms of the data, and I agreed with their assessment that in these three locations, the areas of concern number 3, 7, and 8, that excavation was the appropriate remediation.
Great, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Emily, my apologies if I put Gerald on the spot there. To add to that a little bit, some of these are pretty simple, small cleanups.
Yeah.
And when you get into the feasibility study, you can spend more time, energy, money, and resources, even of the states, efforting all that than just taking it up and hauling it out of there. And these ones kind of hit that framework. And that's the approach that we're allowed to take, and we're trying to explore and to do the decommissioning effectively and still do it efficiently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, Dr. Irwin, you have two questions for Corey?
Yes, thank you. First, about schedule of activities. The May 23rd last year, there were numerous documents that were shared with the Department of Environmental Conservation, Agency of Natural Resources. They shared them with health. And among them, there was a schedule of activities for the majority of the year. And I was wondering if you're going to share a similar schedule of work activities for the coming year from, say, March of 2020 onward. And then the second question is about the status of the advanced off-gas building, particularly the structure systems and components inside it, prior to now that you're approaching the demolition of that building. And then particularly if you could, relation of those structure systems and components that service the plant stack and ventilation of the buildings there at the site.
Thanks, Dr. Irwin, for the question. For the first one, if I understood it correctly, you were looking for the more detailed yearly schedule that we put out previously. We are efforting that. We've obviously made some adjustments due to the impacts that have happened here in the last couple of months. but we plan on having that out in the next month, and we'll definitely get it out for the next NDCAP meeting. Overall, the macro schedule is generally more effective for explaining the level of detail that's usually useful at this NDCAP meeting, but we'll put something together with more detail for one of the following meetings. So I'm going to take a push on that. We'll definitely get that out in one of the next meetings. As far as the AOG, most of the components in AOG are skid mount. Most of those skid mounts have been pulled, and that equipment has already been removed. The ventilation system, with respect to the rest of the plant, will be separated out from AOG. The way that's designed, the AOG is no longer in service. None of the ventilation components are required from AOG to maintain ventilation in the reactor building and to the stack. With respect to the other infrastructure items that support any of the equipment that runs in the rest of the facility, AOG is completely separable from that, and that is also one of the reasons it was designated as an opportunity for large component removal and early in the schedule, because we can effectively fully separate that out, take it cold and dark, remove all the equipment on the inside of it, and demolition the structure.
That's great. Thank you. And one follow-up question. Well, GZ10, which is just east of the advanced off-gas building, is there water in that ground there where that well samples?
I'm going to have to take a look up on that one, Bill. I don't have real-time data on that, but I can get that for you pretty quickly, and I can call you outside of this if you want and follow up with you.
Great, yeah, and if you've got any samples from GZ10, it would be great to see those, because that was where the condensate leak from the AOG tunnel occurred, and obviously it's one of our areas of concern relative to water being dammed up from the east side towards the river by the large concrete foundation of the advanced off-gas building. Thank you very much for your answers and for that assistance in the future.
Thanks, Bill. I'll see what we can find out about GZ10 data, and we'll be in touch.
Lissa, did you have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. I fixed it. I might have missed it because I was trying to fix my system here, but you mentioned there was 4 additional wells that you'd begin sampling in May. I was just wondering, how that determination was made to increase the number of wells.
A good amount of that, Alyssa, was input from the state's consultants, ATC. But they're also in locations that make sense for the monitoring with the site and the hydrological gradient. It all kind of runs from north to south and west to east. So those wells got put on the back corner between it and the river.
I see. Do you know how many total wells there are that are monitored on the property?
I don't have an exact count of which wells are all monitored at this time, but I believe it's right around 30 or 32. But I can find out that data as well, and I can share that with you.
Yes.
Thanks, Troy.
Kicked off.
Okay, I don't believe there's any other questions for Corey. So we can move on to the state agency's assessments. So let's start with the PSD.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. My name is Eric Guzman. I'm a staff attorney with the Department of Public Service.
Yes, I know.
Hey, Anthony, we can hear you.
Fucking meow.
Tony, would you be able to pull up the presentation as well?
Eric, this is your boss, June Tierney. You're doing a great job so far.
Thank you.
My apologies if you heard that, folks.
No worries.
Edit that.
I don't know what you're talking about, Tony.
What are we talking about?
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I was just waiting for the presentation to show up. I'm not seeing it, at least on my end. I can go ahead and start.
No, we're not seeing it here either, Eric.
Okay.
We all were sent copies. We might be able to open those and follow along with you.
Yeah, it's on the NDCAP site.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start just in the interest of time while Tony gets the presentation up. Like I said, my name is Eric Guzman. I'm a staff attorney with the Department of Public Service, and I'll just be providing a brief summary of the department's annual reporting review that was submitted on April 1st by NorthStar. And joining me is Nicholas Capik and Mark Gamir from 4 Points Group. They're the department's consultants, and they've been contracted to assist the department with its project and financial oversight role. And they are helping the department assure that the issues that would challenge successful completion of the project are identified and timely addressed. And so moving on to slide 2, just pull it up here. Just as a general reminder of the department's role in the Vermont Yankee decommissioning, as a part of the department's financial oversight of the project, the department receives monthly expenditures from NorthStar, and those are also submitted to ANR and the Office of Attorney General. We also receive 30-day notice of disbursements for the Site Restoration Trust. We receive the annual public certification detailing work completed versus work that's remaining, and funds remaining versus the amount estimated to be required for completion of the project. We also receive monthly and annual financial disclosures and reports. And we receive monthly updates on the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust and the Site Restoration Trust fund balances. And these documents are submitted to the department on a regular basis and forwarded to our consultants. And the department reviews essentially the financial performance of the project to determine the financial health of NorthStar and assesses the viability of the financial assurances. In coordination with ANR and NorthStar, every month we review the work performed or reported by NorthStar and determine whether it's reasonable and consistent with the SRT and NDT of withdrawals. We also evaluate the project to identify any risks or concerns that could challenge successful completion. And the department continues monthly coordination with the other state agencies and NorthStar to follow up with any questions or concerns resulting from any annual or monthly reporting. I'm sorry, Tony, I don't think you're muted right now.
Actually, I'm getting text messages from Tony. This is Josh, the chair. He can't hear anything at this point. So as you need to change slides, please let me know. I will text him and he will change them.
Okay. And also the department conducts regular site visits to verify the progress reported by NorthStar. We can go ahead and move to slide 3. So as I mentioned, the memorandum of understanding signed by the parties in the Vermont Yankee sale docket 8880 requires NorthStar to provide 2 groups of submissions to the department on an annual basis. Those are the annual public certification documents and the financial disclosures. The public certification is required under the MOU under 2H, and that's submitted to the department, ANR, Department of Health, and the Office of Attorney General. The financial disclosures are submitted solely to the department under Section 2I. And then we can move on to slide 4. So under the MOU under 2H, the annual public certification, apologize here. Under 2H1, the annual public certification is required to detail any work completed as a result of the corrective action plans approved by ANR. As NorthStar in its presentation earlier described, there is not an approved corrective action plan to date. However, that is currently being addressed with public comments. Under 2H3, the amount of funds that are available for site restoration at the end of the calendar year are required to be reported. And that balance of the site restoration trust as of the end of 2019 was approximately $62 million. The balance as of March 31st is approximately $64 million. And the amount of funds estimated for completion of the projects right now reported at approximately $23 million. If we'll move on to slide 5. So under the MOU 2I, as I mentioned earlier, there's financial disclosures reports that are provided only to the Department of Public Service. Those were provided April 1st, and under the MOU that requires audited financials from NorthStar, audited statements of fund balances from NorthStar. If we want to move on to slide 6 here. A current deal model, the completion of partial release and site restoration, as well as a variance analysis are required for submission, and those were submitted to the department, and our consultants at 4 Point received those and reviewed those within the last month. Go on to slide 7. So slide 7 is just a list of the disbursements that were made under the NDT and SRT since the last NDCAP meeting in May. As of March 31st, the balance is $425 million for the NDT trust and roughly $64 million for the SRT. The NDTs, just as a reminder, used to complete all work that's needed for removal of radioactive material and radiological contamination, whereas the Site Restoration Trust is used to clean up any non-radiological contamination. Disbursements from those funds are disbursements from the SRT are for work already completed. All SRT disbursements require a 30-day notice, which the department receives, and the department has 30 days to submit an objection if the department finds that the work performed does not match up the Site Restoration Trust disbursement request. I want to go on to slide 8. So in addition to the annual report, we received the annual radiological effluent release report, as well as the radiological environmental operating report. Based on the department and its consultants' review, there have been no identified concerns related to project safety, work control, radioactive waste management. In addition to the current pandemic, there has been no identified concerns in that area. And as far as progress goes, the department finds that the estimated work completed to be reasonable based on the monthly submissions as well as the annual reporting. And it is the conclusion of the department that NorthStar is on course to complete the project with the current available funding. And NorthStar has completed completed 15 months with approximately 15.5% of the project, and has calculated her value of completion of the project at about 17.3%. And so, based on the reports provided, the department finds that NorthStar is on course to complete the decommissioning. And so I can go ahead and end it here and open up to any questions. 4 Points is available on the call to answer any questions regarding their review as well.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Representative Sibilia, you have the floor with the first question.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. That was a good presentation. We've had a number of conversations about the financing, and just a follow up from our last conversation, maybe for 4 Point. We had talked about what type of red flags they would be looking for with regard to the decommissioning expenses and drawdowns. And I asked this question, as a project that is ahead of a lot of other projects in the state or in the country. So not because I am thinking that there are red flags, but what types of red flags would you be looking for?
Yeah, Nick or Mark, would you like to answer that question for Representative Sibilia? I don't know if they are able to connect right now. I know that they were on the call, so it might be an issue with sound.
They have chatted into the chat box that they are muted right now, and if they wanted to respond, they'll have to be unmuted. Tony, are you able to unmute them?
I don't know that Tony can hear us at this point. I'm communicating with him via text because he seems to have lost partial connection at least. So we're doing the best we can right now.
Okay, I can now hear you again because I dialed in.
All right, there we go. So Tony, Mark, and Nick of FPG are all muted, and we need to get them unmuted so they can respond to Representative Sibilia's question.
Okay, hold on. Wait, I'm sorry. Who do you need unmuted again?
That would be Nick Capik at FPG, as well as Mark Gamir.
Okay. Oh, lovely. I'm not finding Nick right now.
It looks like Nick has been unmuted on my end.
Okay, I've just unmuted everyone.
Tony, Mark, or Nick, can you hear us? Can you talk to us?
I can hear you, but I did not hear the question.
This is Mark Amir. I can hear you.
This is Nick. We're on now, too. So the question was, what are the red flags that we'd be looking for? I think there are 3 primary red flags. The first one is a change in scope for the project that would significantly increase cost. A good example of that is finding unexpected contamination, particularly soil or concrete. The second is a substantial change in schedule that would also increase costs. And then the third would be some kind of financial change that would make NorthStar unable to satisfy the financial assurances that have been made.
Mr.
Representative Sibilia, I believe that was you, but you were echoing pretty bad. Nobody could hear you.
May I follow up?
Yes, ma'am.
Just quickly, have any of those types of situations happened during NorthStar's decommissioning to date?
To date, there's been no change in the scope of the project. There have been changes in the schedule, and NorthStar is taking appropriate corrective actions at this point. Those relate to the vessel segmentation project. And with regard to financial assurances, the situation has improved from what it was when the MOU was entered a year ago or a year and a half ago.
Thank you very much. I'm finished with my questions.
Okay, so the next question on the list, Dr. Irwin, do you have a question?
Yes, hopefully it's not reverberating, but my question is, the 4 Points group, do you publish reports for people to review your fine work?
We provide reports to the Department of Public Service. Many of them contain confidential information, so beyond our providing them to DPS, I don't know where they're distributed. Eric, you may be able to answer.
Yeah, so they, 4 Points does provide monthly summaries, which do, like Nick said, contain which do contain confidential information. So those are limited to the department's review.
Dr. Irwin, do you have anything additional?
No, thank you.
All right, I don't see any further questions for the PSD. Let's move on to ANR, please. The Agency of Natural Resources.
I believe a question came up for Lisa.
Oh, yeah, I just saw it come up. Lisa, what do you got?
I was just interested in the site restoration work, and I noticed in the past 4 months it sort of doubled from the spending doubled from the previous 4 months. And I guess I'm just not really sure what kind of work goes on with the site restoration right now. I mean, what does that work consist of is what I'm asking, and was there a reason why the expenditures doubled relative to the previous 4 months at the end of the year?
Nick, do you have
this is Nick. I can certainly answer, although do you want NorthStar to respond to this, or do you want us to respond?
I don't care. I don't care.
So most of the site work, there really are 3 site pieces. One is characterization, a second is preparation of buildings for demolition, and then a third is soil removal. So most of the characterization, or virtually all of the characterization of accessible areas, have been performed. And that's what a lot of those costs have been. The second part relates to non-radiological remediation like asbestos. So both of those activities have gone on. Most of the characterization is done, and the non-radiological remediation continues. So that jump in expenditures related to the progress on those projects.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So can I ask a follow-up?
Sure, go ahead. Is that Emily?
Yeah, sorry, this is Emily.
Yep, go ahead. Go ahead.
So the nature of that work, that's just more expensive.
I'm sorry, you cut out. Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, and I heard an echo. I took myself off mute quickly, but the nature of that different work that you were describing, is that just inherently more expensive work then? So it's not necessarily that the overall productivity is different, but it's just a more, expensive kind of work?
No, the contract that's been set up is one where NorthStar recovers from the trust funds based on its progress. And with regard to site restoration, NorthStar has not recovered the full extent of the work it has done. So that was an attempt by them to true those up a little bit. They still believe that they've completed much more of the characterization work than they've recovered for. But that's why the change in recovery. And there was some pushback from us and A&R, which is why it's not continued. NorthStar is keeping more effective contingency in those accounts by not claiming compensation for work it believes it has completed.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I believe that ends our questions. If you are not talking, please mute yourself. That should help take care of our echo that we're having. A&R, if you are ready, please begin.
Okay. This is Gerald Noyes from the Waste Management Division. You can, I guess, go on to the second slide. That's the first, get away from the titles. As Corey said earlier, Haley and Aldridge had submitted their supplemental site investigation on behalf of NorthStar. This investigation was basically to follow up on the initial investigation that was submitted in July of 2019. It further explored some of the areas of contamination that were identified. The state received that report end of January, and it basically updated the initial site investigation results, took some additional samples of the areas of contamination that were identified. Much of this was soil sampling for polyaromatic hydrocarbons, for semi-volatile compounds, volatile organic compounds, and total petroleum hydrocarbons. These are things associated with petroleum fuel storage areas, vehicle maintenance, heating fuel storage like fuel oil, diesel. Also, then there are transformers which have oil coolant in them. Next slide. That'd be number 3. The supplemental site investigation did not really find anything significantly new or unexpected from what was previously identified in the initial site investigation. It did, however, refine some of the degree and extent of contamination has been previously identified. And this information gets used to develop corrective action plans for the areas of contamination. Next slide. As Corey said, quarterly groundwater monitoring was performed through 2019. 4 rounds were completed. Some of those results were initially reported in the supplemental site investigation. 3 of those 4 rounds had some split samples with the state technical consultant, ATC Group Services. And what they did was they basically stood alongside the Haley and Aldridge technicians and collected duplicate samples, which were shipped off to a different lab. And the purpose of this was for quality control. Basically, was Haley and Aldridge doing the work as they said they would in their work plans and according to their standard operating procedures, and were the results comparable between the 2 labs? And there is going to be a groundwater sampling report issued soon. I've spoken with Haley and Aldridge. They had initially said end of April, but I've been told that it will be coming quite soon. The first quarter for 2020 has been planned for May 2020, and that will also include split samples with ATC. Next slide. In addition,
hey Gerald, can I interrupt you real quick? Is anybody able to see the slides right now?
I'm seeing them, and
Erwin is.
Yes, Chuck Suarez.
Yes.
I see them, Lissa.
Okay, great.
This Bob Leach here. I'm not seeing them.
I think there's a handful of us that are seeing them, a handful of us that are not seeing them. So
I've got the presentation in my hand. I'm kind of following it with that anyway.
Okay, I'm on slide number 5.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. So as Corey said, Haley and Aldridge has overseen the installation of a groundwater interception system. This is designed to prevent clean groundwater from infiltrating in turbine building basement, and once it gets in, then it needs to be disposed of as radiologically contaminated water. So the purpose of the system will be to intercept that groundwater while it's still clean and discharge it to the Connecticut River without going through the building basement. That system's been designed, and Haley and Aldridge has submitted the groundwater or the discharge permit application to the ANR. Next slide, number 6. So that that permit is in review, and that is on the environmental notice board along with the corrective action plan. So there is, or that permit will be placed on the ENB for public comment. Moving on, Corey talked about the corrective action plans which were submitted. Haley and Aldridge submitted 4 plans on behalf of NorthStar. The first one is kind of a site corrective action plan containing general approaches of what they propose to do at individual AOCs. AOC number 3, the first of the 3 individual corrective action plans, was the excavation of approximately, by the testing that was done in the supplemental site investigation, they basically delineated an area containing of about 300 yards of contaminated soil from the south warehouse. This soil, or the warehouse, was used to store used and virgin motor oil, battery storage, vehicle maintenance. I mean, this is a large site. They had a lot of vehicles. So not unlike what might be found in a typical garage, automobile garage. Next slide. Okay, and the next AOC was they identified a fuel oil, above ground fuel oil storage tank at the shipping and receiving building that had an area of stained soil under it from just ongoing use. Again, and nothing huge, and they're proposing an excavation of approximately eight yards of soil, and that soil would be shipped off-site to Texas, WCS. And then the third corrective action plan was for AOC number 8, and this was again stained soil from a transformer pad that was located at the former East Cooling Tower. Again, really no, other than the investigation to figure out how much and where it exactly was, no feasibility study or anything like that was necessary. It was fairly obvious this is just spilled oil or cooling oil for the transformer. They'll dig it up, ship it off site, and then do confirmatory samples in the empty hole to prove that they've got it all. Our next slide is number 8. So the ANR DEC is doing, we're doing reviews of the work that's being submitted, the supplemental site investigation. That was reviewed by the DEC and the technical support contractor, ATC. We've submitted the comments to Haley and Aldrich. The wastewater program is reviewing the groundwater discharge permit application from Haley and Aldrich, and the Department of Health has developed groundwater testing criteria for the ANR to use for the discharge permit. And yeah, we can move on to the next slide. It would be number 9. The 4 corrective action plans have been reviewed by the DEC and have been approved subject to public comment. So they're still draft, and they've been placed on the environmental notice board for public comment. Here is the web address for that, enb.vermont.gov, and then just do a search for, I would like to say do a search for Vermont Yankee. Unfortunately, the site's been called VT Yankee or Vermont Yankee, and there's several different permits. But if you search the address for 320 Governor Hunt, that will get all of the corrective action plans and all of the permits that are publicly searchable, such as the discharge and the stormwater permits. All right, next slide, number 9 or number 10. The ongoing work for the demolition, of course, as there's asbestos abatement going on in all the buildings as they're being prepared for demolition. Our consultant ATC, they've been present for some of a site-wide asbestos review that was done with Hillman, which is NorthStar's asbestos contractor, and then ATC has gone on site to inspect particular sections of each asbestos removal. That is, they've checked for that the containment facility, the area has been properly sealed off before the work gets done, that the asbestos crew for NorthStar is doing the work in an appropriate manner, and ATC has been reporting back to us, and they have not reported any significant anomalies. Pre-demolition building material characterization is also occurring. Is there lead paint on some of the? There is lead paint on some of the metal. Some of the caulking has small amounts of PCB in them, so they have to do these inspections to make sure to identify these areas, and so that they can be appropriately disposed of, so that material can be appropriately disposed of. Next slide is number 11. Additional ongoing work will be more of this groundwater sampling. We're doing split sampling of that. The sample results basically are showing some areas of low-level groundwater contamination, like what might be found at a gas station or where there's been some fuel spillage. The comparison between the labs has shown acceptable precision on sampling. And initially, there were some minor procedural deviations between what was the Haley and Aldridge technicians were doing and their quality assurance plan. They were noted by ATC. ATC reported back to us and let H&A know about that, and they were corrected. So, but they're still going out. ATC is still going out there as kind of a second set of eyes. If we move on to the next slide, number 12. So ATC will continue to be used to provide their evaluations of the submitted reports and work plans, continue with the split sampling, and continue with the ongoing asbestos work and reporting conditions and evaluations of what they see during their site visits. And we'll probably be doing some, they will be doing some split sampling of once the wastewater permits get implemented. They will also then take up some split sampling there, because there will be will be sampling program to ensure that the water that gets pumped out of the ground is not contaminated before it gets discharged to the Connecticut River. So they will also be doing some sampling alongside Haley and Aldridge. And I guess that is the last slide, or one more slide, and then I can open it up for questions. So our future work is going to be more of the same, what we've been doing. Continue to review the work plans, the environmental permits, disposal documents, sampling results, corrective action plans, site remediation, pretty much anything that NorthStar submits or Haley and Aldridge submits on behalf of NorthStar. We'll continue to use our technical support contractor for abatement observations, split samplings. They also have been reviewing some of the submittals and the work plans. So anyway, that is what the DEC has been doing, and I can open it up to any questions.
Emily, I believe you have a question for Gerald.
Yeah, thank you for preparing this presentation, Gerald. I have a couple questions, if I may. First one, easy one. On the ENB, I'm looking at the what's posted for 320 Governor Hunt Road, and under what's there, under the status column, there are a few that say in review, and then there are some, the corrective action plans are under draft decision and comment. Which one of the, like, where do each one of those sit in the timeline of in the process of these permits? And which one is first?
Okay, I don't have the E and B in front of me. My understanding is that the permits that I won't say permits, but the corrective action plans that I worked on, those are out for public comment. So they have been approved subject to comment. So if there is no public comment on them, they will be approved. They'll be sent. I'll just write a letter back to Haley and Aldridge and NorthStar saying, do what you said you were going to do. If there is public comment, I'll review the comments, talk with Haley and Aldridge, and we'll see what those comments, what if anything needs to be changed because of the comment. The other permits, they're not programs that I work with closely. My understanding is that the stormwater and that the discharge permits, they are being developed. I've sat in on a couple of meetings on that. Bill Irwin sat in on the last one. So, the permit application was submitted by Haley and Aldridge on behalf of NorthStar. The A&R is now writing the permit, reviewing the permit, and we don't have someone here who can say what the exact stage is, but I could get back to you on that and let you know.
I think what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is that when it says in review, it is just, that's not necessarily a certain, chronological stage in the timeline, but rather it's just internal staff review. And like in review means that it's looking at, it's being looked at internally in the agency, and under draft comment, that's in public comment period, right?
That is correct. If it's in review, it just means that the permit application was submitted to the A&R, and now the application is being reviewed, and a permit will be written if the application is complete and there are no questions. But the four that I mentioned that I work with directly, which are the corrective action plans, we're waiting on public comment to see if there should be any modifications. But until we get any comments, we're not expecting needing any modification.
That was going to be another question, was if you had any public comments yet in the probably the 21 days or 20 days that it's been posted?
I have not on the 4 corrective action plans.
Do you typically get public comments on these kinds of plans?
On corrective action plans, very rarely. I mean, most of my corrective action plans have been things like gas stations and after this investigation is done, the consultant then comes up with a plan of how to clean up, and very rarely get any corrective action, any comments.
Would you remind the panel and myself, mostly myself, what's the process that the public becomes aware of what's posted on the environmental notice bulletin? And I'm wondering also, as just a broader process question, if there's any other way that these corrective action plans have been posted so that folks can see them.
Well, they get posted on the environmental notice board, and then the A&R sends out a letter to individual landowners of abutting properties.
Okay.
And basically that individual notice is a reference to that, yes, there's corrective action going on. Please check the environmental notice board for details, and gives my email and name as the project manager. as a contact for the ANR.
Okay. I do have one more question, but I'm tempted to, it's a little bit technical, and I'm not sure that it'll necessarily serve the purposes of this panel. It's just an
I just lost the rest of your question there.
Oh, I got muted.
You got muted. Can you repeat the question?
I said it so nicely the first time. I was just saying, I think I do have another question, but it's a little bit technical. I'm not sure that it really serves the purpose of the panel and the work that we're doing this evening. So I might just pause and see if there are other questions, and let the conversation move on. But thank you.
Okay.
So there are no other additional questions that I see in the conversation area of the Skype meeting here, unless somebody has something that they have not presented yet. And hearing nothing, Emily, do you want to ask your technical question, or do you want to save that as an email to?
I would love to. It's a technical question about documents, which is really exciting. Gerald, I might just be missing something, but when I look on the ENB and again search for 320 Governor Hunt Road, I see 4 documents that are those in review permits, which sound like those are outside of your purview, but within the agency. And then I see 4 other documents that are the corrective action plans that are in draft decision and comment. And those all have different ENB IDs, but the same permit number of the corrective action plans. So when I click on each one of those, I can see the 2 plans for AOC 3 and AOC 7, and those make sense to me. And then for the other 2, the final 2, I'm looking at this document from Haley and Aldrich, which from February 2019. And I think that this is what you were referring to. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that this is what you were referring to with this kind of this general approach to these these 4 AOCs. But the idea is that for each one, and they're discrete and simple enough that you don't necessarily have to have a full-blown plan for each. This is more of your general approach. So my question is that right? Is that how you're going about this? And I guess maybe I'm asking if you could help me understand what I'm looking at here and where, if there's going to be corrective action plans for those 2 other AOCs.
Well, there's the AOC 3 and 7. The last one was number 8, and I think that was the transformer ones. Now, did that not? Pardon?
There wasn't a 4th. I could be.
Well, there were 3 individual AOCs, and then there is one kind of a corrective action plans for the 3 individual AOCs, and then there was one general one for. That's going to be kind of a site-wide, so that will apply to, because there are, I think, 17 or so of these areas of concern, and they will get individual corrective action plans, but there will not be another general one put out.
Okay.
But
okay. And that all falls under this same permit number that you have here, whether it be an individual corrective action plan or the general site restoration plan.
Correct. The way the ENB works, there are some small glitches in it. I mean, I was attempting to use the general one as kind of the master corrective action plan and have the other 3, the AOC 3, 7, and 8 as corrective action plan amendments. And when I was working on my computer to get that to get into the ENB that way, it wasn't happening.
Okay.
So as long as you can read the documents, you can get the documents, that's the important thing.
I can read the documents. The connective tissue between them was my question. I think I might let the rest of the panel move forward. Thank you, everybody, for humoring that discussion of documents. And thank you, Gerald. That's helpful.
You're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And feel free to email me if you have any specific questions.
Okay.
Okay, I don't see any additional questions for ANR. I don't believe we have any additional state agencies on that are ready to present anything. Do we have any additional panel questions for NorthStar or for the state reports? Hearing none, as long as everyone is okay with it, I believe we will skip our break because we are all sitting in the luxury of our homes anyway. So we'll move on to public questions for NorthStar or on any of the state reports.
Okay, all lines for the public should be open.
Okay.
Please remember to unmute yourself.
All right, not hearing any questions from the public. We will move on to general public comments. If anyone has general public comments, please unmute yourself and do so now, please.
This is Ann Darling. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I actually did type in a question, and I have two questions. One was to know, I would like to know specifically what precautions are being taken to protect the workers from coronavirus. I know that was mentioned that the state felt that the precautions being taken were good and effective. I just wanted to know more detail.
So Corey and or David Pearson, if you can field that question, please.
So I'm here. Hello, Ann.
Hi, Corey.
Hi. This could be a really long conversation because it's an extensive list of items that we're doing, but we've managed to comply with the state of Vermont's executive order, all 12 of the addendums. We're monitoring folks at the beginning of their shift. They take their temperatures. Folks are wearing masks when they're in the proximity of each other. We've even provided meals for folks for their lunches and dinners so that they don't have a point of vulnerability or transmission vector traveling to get food and going to the grocery store. We've done a detailed task analysis for all the job groups. We've broken people up into smaller teams. We've limited our meeting sizes. We're working remotely where people can. And we're employing all the precautions that are known from the CDC and WHO that are reasonably employable. Hand washing, sanitization, wiping down systems. We even have extra cleaning people coming in, looking at all the common areas. And we're monitoring it carefully to make sure that folks are thinking about it every day too. So that the task analysis is an iterative process where we ask our people to watch each other and tell us how they can do their job more safely. And we made process changes wherever it makes sense to do so. If you have anything more specific, please let me know, but hopefully that's answering the question you're asking.
And so how has that impacted your ability to move the work forward? I know you said you had to kind of rearrange a few things.
So that's a good question. And fortunately, the teams that are doing the vessel segmentation, the type of PPE and the equipment they're wearing already lends itself to meet all those requirements, as does the demolition activities for the folks cutting out the steam lines and the equipment out of the turbine building. Now, when we get into the demolition of the exterior structures, that requires a little more active participation on our part to manage the work groups, to keep them small and the way they interface with each other. So it does have an appreciable effect, but it is manageable. And so far, we've been able to continue successfully. And, knock on wood, we haven't yet to have a case here at the site. Our goal is to keep it that way, and we ask everybody to treat that as a team sport because we're all counting on each other, and our families are counting on all of us to make sure we do everything right and safe.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
The other thing I wanted to say was Tony mentioned earlier that the representative Mark from Massachusetts is not present, and as I've said before, as a resident of Massachusetts, I've spoken with him. He is not a member of the panel, and I've asked that you try and find someone from Massachusetts to represent the interests of folks here on the panel. So I've been asking for quite a while, so I don't know what the problem is, but I'd like to see it remedied.
Hi, Anne. This is Tony Leshinskie. The way the panel is set up and the way the appointee for Massachusetts and New Hampshire, for that matter, are appointed is the governor's offices from the individual states must make the appointment. We can try to reach out to the governor's offices again. I know in the past week, New Hampshire has contacted me about, well, what needs to be done. So I relayed information back to Bob Gustafson's department so they know what's going on. But I would say what we need to do is perhaps have the Vermont governor's office contact the Massachusetts governor's office again to get a new appointee. But I don't have a way of, I don't want to say force, but emphasize to the governor's, Massachusetts governor's office that this is important.
I understand.
Mr. Chair, June Tierney would like to speak.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I'm aware of this request, Ms. Darling, and the request has been forwarded to the governor's office, and I am very sorry that it is taking so long to get an answer back or an appointment back. My memory is that the last dealings I had with the governor's office on this were shortly before the onset of the pandemic, and I'm sure you can understand that the state has been fully engaged since, I would say, mid-February in dealing with the public emergency that the governor declared.
Right.
So I realize that's not a satisfying answer to you, but that is the state of affairs.
Well, I certainly understand this is not as high a priority, and I'm glad he's trying to protect us here in Massachusetts. When you said you last had contact in February, can you tell me what about that contact? What?
Very simply, I let them know that we need somebody appointed and they need to reach out to Massachusetts and their counterparts. And beyond that, I'm not going to go into it.
Is there, is this just the governor's office? No, perhaps citizen contacted might help.
You're certainly welcome to contact the governor's, I think it's called Hiro. It's their portal for constituent or public interest concerns. And you're certainly welcome to make a query through that. I'm sorry, I can't recall the details of how to do it, but it's on the website. And I can think of no reason why you couldn't do that.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, I will accept any additional public comments at this point or questions.
Wow.
I believe someone named Deb Katz is trying to speak, but you are very
far out.
Yeah, something like that. I can't even put a word to it. All I can think of is Alvin and the Chipmunks.
Yeah. Deb, if I can suggest, can you text your question or use the instant messenger feature? Maybe that'll help.
So we'll hold just a second and see if we get a question come through IM from Deb. And Deb, IM is in your lower left-hand corner of your screen. In the meantime, do any other public have questions or comments? Okay, so I did get a question from Deb come through IM. This is for NorthStar regarding COVID protocols for workers. New workers coming in, what procedures do you follow for new workers coming in the COVID era? Corey, I believe that one's for you.
Protocols for workers. So the protocols for new workers coming on site, we require, if they're coming from out of state, that
Hey, Corey, I believe you're muted.
Is that better?
Yep, you're back now. So we didn't catch anything. We heard the very beginning sentence.
Yep. So new workers that come onto the site are required to self-monitor and ensure that they have not been exposed to anyone who has tested positive for the virus or suspected have had the virus. And then they're also required to follow all the social distancing rules, wear masks, and continue to self-police, including taking their temperatures at the beginning of their shifts, and follow the protocols that are still in alignment with Governor Scott's executive orders. And I believe it's addendum 7 through 12 as they changed. And the last executive order 12 has some additional information as we're starting to bring the businesses back online. But effectively, they have to self-monitor and follow all the rules and prove that they do not have it and continue to not have the virus. Does that answer the question?
Deb has an additional question. Has anyone tested positive on the site?
No one's tested positive for COVID-19 at the Vermont Yankee site to date.
Okay, I believe that is the end of Deb's question. Do we have any additional public questions or comments, please? Seeing none, we will move on to the next part of our agenda, which is the panel pursuit of national decommissioning and spent fuel issues. And for this particular section, I will hand it over to Lissa, as this is something that she asked to be added to the agenda. So the floor is yours, Lissa.
Thank you, Josh. In reviewing the legislation regarding NDCAP's duties, I was struck by some of the language about our duty to advise on issues related to decommissioning, and it seems to me that we haven't really taken a position and advised much on issues as a panel. And I think the big issue for me is always the redevelopment of the site and the future, those 26 years after completion of decommissioning, where we're still going to have the spent fuel likely maybe even longer on site. And I just think that the panel should potentially take a look at this issue and consider having an advisory opinion on some of the legislative efforts that are out there. There was a number of pieces of legislation that were presented in this last Congress, and of course now due to the pandemic, a lot of the stuff gets put on the back burner. But then again, a lot of stuff tries to get pushed through at the final hour too. And I think that it just behooves us as a panel to potentially take a position on one or more of these issues, if only to try to stimulate some national action on this intractable problem regarding how we deal with spent fuel nuclear waste. And I know that there's probably nobody who wants to address this more than the people at NorthStar. And there might be opportunities for the panel to support NorthStar in some of its legislative pushes, potentially for the waste control specialists interim storage facility to be actually licensed and brought on or not. We did take a position as a panel. I know I've mentioned it before. I'll just address it briefly. Under Kate O'Connor, there was a letter that was signed that with some of the other Yankees that puts us on the record as supporting consolidated interim storage, the development of such the kind of waste control specialist facility that NorthStar would probably like to see developed. But I guess I just wanted to put it out there. I reviewed the procedures for advisory opinions to be considered by the panel. Someone like me would potentially write an opinion, maybe form a subcommittee, maybe working with someone like Corey or someone else who's interested in this issue, and then bring it before the panel for discussion, and then see if it's something that we would like to vote on. So my main concern is just to clear the record for regarding this consolidated interim storage position that we unwittingly took. And if indeed that's something that we want to back as a panel, then I think we should actually have a vote on it. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I think in terms of there's bills about local compensation for having the waste and having to protect it while it's here. There's considerations regarding timing that these different pieces of legislation address. And the other piece is just for us to be able to network with other sites where the stranded spent fuel is, and potentially add our voice to the national mix so that there could potentially be some action on this issue sometime in the future before those 26 years are up. So that's just what I wanted to address the panel regarding that, and hear if anybody else had any opinions or insights, or felt this was something that we should take up or not take up, and if so, how to proceed. Should I present an advisory opinion and have us discuss it in the future, or is this something that the panel just doesn't want to touch? So I turn it back over to you, Josh.
Okay. Representative Coffey, you have a follow-up to Lissa?
Yes, thank you. So Lissa, I know that this has been an issue that you've raised to the panel before, and I'm wondering now that in one of the obstacles I think has been in terms of getting a deeper understanding of some of the issues has been a financial one in our ability that we did not have any kinds of funds to bring in some experts or speakers. And one thought I had is that it seems that there's a real opportunity with our panel to, at minimum, hear from some members of our federal delegation or their staff to give us some updates on federal legislation that could help inform some of this. I think it could be, if others think that that's a good idea, I mean, that might be something for us to be working towards on a future agenda. I'm not opposed at all about having an opinion, but I know that I guess I'm not the newest member of this panel anymore by a long shot, and it might be worth educating this batch of panelists a little bit more on some of the issues. So, and with NorthStar's generous, or this offer that we have some funding to do that, that's now possible where that wasn't possible before. So those are just my 2 cents, and I'm looking forward to hearing other people's thoughts, because I think this could be an important role of the panel, and I think there might be a number of topics that we might want to consider.
Bob Leach here. I know a little bit about what's going on. As of right now, there's no money in the budget for processing the license at Yucca Mountain. I don't exactly know what's happening in reality, but I do know that the next budget year, they've got no money in it to continue the processing of the license for that facility. Horrendous amounts of our dollars are the money we have paid into the fund for that particular issue through our rates. It's in a fund, and the Department of Energy was supposed to take on the responsibility of starting up a site. Congress picked Yucca Mountain as that site, and a horrendous amount of funds have been spent in developing that site. Nevada does not want it there, and as of right now, they're not funding it next year. Now, there's a move in Congress to put money in that budget for it. I don't know exactly where that's standing right at the moment because of all the stuff going on with this Corona-19 issue. So the other thing that keeps popping up, they want to find someplace off-site where they could gather up this spent fuel, i.e. like what we've got stored in Vermont Yankee. That doesn't appear to be moving anyplace. The best place to put that, if we do it, is right there at Yucca Mountain. They've got the area, and they can certainly set up someplace to accept that fuel and store it there until such time as they do something in the final issue. The facility that we are part of down in Texas is also moving in the direction of trying to establish a storage facility down there. I don't think there's been any serious movement on that other than by the group that owns that particular facility, but that's all I've heard. Can't help you much more than that.
Thank you, Bob. Anyone else have a question or follow-up regarding this particular topic? Are we interested as a panel?
Yeah, Josh, I can add something to this as well.
Great. Go ahead, Anthony.
Okay. One of my duties is to represent the state of Vermont in what is called the National Transportation Stakeholders Forum, which is Department of Energy's means of consulting with state governments regarding spent nuclear fuel shipments to either a permanent repository or an interim repository. So most of what Bob Leach has described matches with what I have garnered through that consultation. I don't know if I can add anything more to it right now, other than the fact that if we do want some expert presentation on this, I certainly have contacts in Department of Energy and also the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that can discuss the status of this. Some of you who have been on the panel for a few years will recall that I believe it was in the end of 2017, I made a presentation on the status of spent fuel storage in the United States and its history. Admittedly, it has not changed much since then, honestly. So that's about all I will add at this point. But certainly, if there is specific information that the panel wants, let me know, and I can find the people for it.
Haley from Senator Sanders' office, can you send me a little IM? What can you add to this discussion, please? And make sure you're unmuted so we can hear you.
Yeah, Haley, you should be unmuted. On my end, she looks to be unmuted. No, we're not hearing you right now. Did you self-mute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. This is Haley Perro from Senator Bernie Sanders' office. I've attended some meetings, particularly when they're in person, and I know Tom Barry is also on the line from Senator Leahy's office. And as our offices have done in the past, I just want to reiterate we're happy to give, kind of a general federal update. Typically, that's going to look like a summary of any legislative action, any new bills on nuclear issues, decommissioning, and, budget issues, particularly with Senator Leahy's role on appropriations. So we're happy to do that. I'm not sure it's to the level of detail that you may be looking for to take an advisory opinion. If we have advance notice, we can certainly draw on some of our resources. We have, obviously contacts in Department of Energy, the NRC, and we also have access to the Congressional Research Service. They can provide some memos on particular issues. So I just want to set expectations that we aren't, experts on this issue alone, and I wouldn't rely purely on us, but at any point that you would sort of like an overview, and if you want to do that either on a regular schedule, I'd be open to that, and imagine the other offices would be as well. Usually when issues come up between meetings, I'll email Tony and/or Josh and Lissa as well to keep you apprised or mention any comment periods, anything of that nature. So again, I'm not exactly sure if that's what you're looking for, but just wanted to let you know what role we can provide. I don't know if Tom wants to add anything to that.
Tom, do you have anything for us? Nope. Looks like he's all set. Any additional comments regarding this topic or an idea of how we would like to pursue this or not pursue this particular issue?
Josh, Bob Leach here again. One thing that I've kind of mulled over in my mind is this whole issue. We've got one representative and two senators, and it might be worth our time and effort to draft a letter off to all three of those individuals supporting Yucca Mountain so that they could kind of get that darn thing rolling. It's close to being ready to accepting fuel. It just mostly just needs the money in the budget that is already there. It's money that the ratepayers have put in there in a fund to go ahead with the licensing and open that thing up. It was our Congress that picked that spot out of all of us, all the different sites in this country that were looked at. And if they're the ones that set it up, then let them finish it. And let us put together a letter telling our representatives to support that activity. It's just an idea. We could put it on the next time these, the committee for our issues to discuss by the panel. We could look into it a little bit and set it up for the next meeting if the panel is interested.
Well, this is the kind of thing that, I want to open up because I would completely disagree. I mean, first of all, Yucca Mountain was just recently not funded. It came up in front of the Congress and they didn't want to fund it. The people in Nevada don't want it. It's on an Indian reservation and it's been deemed geologically unsuitable. Further, it would already be full. I mean, we're creating nuclear waste every day and we have no place to put it. Even if we could use Yucca Mountain, it would already be to its capacity, according to what I've read. So it really is an important issue nationally, and I do feel that the panel should at least educate ourselves about it a bit because it does affect us greatly in many different potential ways, having that spent fuel there for the foreseeable future, maybe forever. What does that mean? Their government is creating a new nuclear waste administration agency. From what I understand, it will no longer be under the auspices of DOE. At least that was the recommendation of the Blue Ribbon Commission that Obama set up. It seems to be something that the Trump administration is following in the footsteps of them. So these are important issues, and I think, we as a community that has waste should really weigh in at whether you like nuclear power or you don't like nuclear power. We can't keep creating nuclear waste if there's no plan for dealing with it. It hurts everyone. So I do think it's something that we should take up. How we do so is the question I'm putting in front of you guys. We talked about having Jim Hamilton come in. He's with the National Spent Fuel Collaborative. I don't know if it's still called that. But we need more advocacy on this issue.
So I would suggest, since we're already about 2.5 hours into our meeting, that we obviously have varying opinions on this particular issue within the committee, and it's really hard to do a whole heck of a lot through a Skype meeting like this and work through an extensive issue like this through this particular avenue. I suggest that we move this on to the next meeting, which I'm assuming will probably be in person. Chris Campany did send me a message that he has a comment to make. So, Chris, I'll give you the floor before we close up this topic and move it to a next meeting.
I'm good, thanks.
Okay. All right. So,
Josh, this is Bob Leach again. Just let me add one little tidbit to this waste transportation. Way back when they were originally looking at sites for where they were going to put this waste, Vermont was one of the sites that was being considered. Congress elected to put it in Nevada. They elected to put it there because the federal government owns most of that state, and there's not a lot of people there. Well, Vermont, the federal government doesn't own a lot of Vermont, but it is a state that doesn't have very many people and doesn't have a lot of representation. So before we shoot down Yucca Mountain, we may pick a new site, and it might be Vermont. Just a tidbit. Go ahead.
I appreciate that, Bob. As I mentioned, we will move this on to the next meeting. Representative Sibilia, you have something for us real quick?
Just a comment, listening to this, I'm not sure that advocacy so much as public facilitation and education is our role. And I've heard advocacy on this issue being discussed. So I just want to flag that will be a concerning word for me in future discussions.
Well, we're already advocating for consolidated interim storage because we're already on the record as supporting that without a vote. What I'd like to see is a discussion, and if we are in favor of supporting federal efforts to create an interim consolidated storage facility, then we should talk about it, we should vote on it, because right now that's what people think, that's what the advocates are using the letter that we signed to do. So you talk about advocacy, it's already being used as a tool of advocacy by others, our position taken without a vote on this very important matter. So, I'd like to move that we create a subcommittee to draft an advisory opinion on this matter. I'd volunteer to be on that subcommittee. If anybody wants to join me, I'd like to actually put something in writing to present at the next meeting rather than just kicking this can down the road, which is in fact what happens nationally and what's been happening for the past 50 years. So yeah, I mean, it's not something people are always eager to get into, but for those who'd like to produce more nuclear reactors and for those who are concerned about the buildup of waste at sites throughout the United States, it matters. So I think it matters for this panel to keep moving. And if anybody would like to join, maybe I'd make a motion that the issues committee create a little subcommittee that can sit together or Zoom together and create a document that might start drafting an advisory opinion on the matter. That's what I'd like to put a motion for. Does anybody second that? Guess not.
I second it. This is Sarah.
So moved and seconded to establish a subcommittee to discuss, I guess, spent fuel issues and the direction of the panel is in an advisory manner. Laura, Representative Sibilia, you have an additional comment?
I don't know, Mr. Chair, respectfully, I don't know that you captured the motion that I heard. I think I heard a motion to have a small group draft an advisory opinion.
Correct.
So if that were to go forward, I would want to understand how. I would want to make sure that there was plenty of time for public participation in that.
I agree. So there's a there's a motion and a second on the table to establish a subcommittee regarding this particular issue. Let's take a vote to see if we want to establish that subcommittee, and I will go down through the names. Please say yay or nay as we go down through. Maddie Arms.
Nay.
Chris Campney.
Can you come back to me?
Yes. Sarah Coffey.
Yes.
Corey Daniels.
Nay.
Emily Davis.
Yay. Yay.
Reluctantly. Dr. Irwin.
Yes.
Bob Leach.
Nay.
Brett Long.
He ain't here.
Did we lose Brett? Okay. David Pearson.
Did we lose him?
Nay.
Chuck Shore.
I'm going to abstain.
Abstain. Representative Sevilla. Please unmute yourself so we can hear you.
I'm going to vote no, because I need more information on what we're doing here.
Commissioner Tierney.
This is a tough one. The reason I think it's tough is I really want to see the citizens guide this panel, but my view is no.
Okay. Josh Unruh, that's me. I vote nay. Lissa Wyman.
Yes.
Back to Chris Campbell.
Yeah, my concern is that, sorry, I know the echo is bad. It's just really hard to have a good conversation in this context where we're having to do it remote. I'm okay with having the conversation. I just think it needs to be when we can actually meet face to face again. There can actually be more public engagement. So I'm inclined to vote no right now. Defer it for another time.
Okay, so the motion has been defeated, and if I'm doing my numbers right, Anthony 8-4.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting here as well.
Okay.
Well, now we can see why nothing happens on a national level.
All right, so we'll move on to the next agenda item, schedule a reading 20.
Dear.
I'm still here, Tony. It's Sarah.
Yeah, okay, can folks hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I was trying to eliminate some of the echo, and I think I accidentally muted everyone.
That's okay. So everybody get your calendars out, and Anthony, I'll ask you to take the lead on this one with your calendar as well to schedule the rest of our 2020 panel meetings, or at least our next couple, being that we're in the situation that we're in and not really knowing what tomorrow holds.
Okay. Okay, so going by what we did last year, we met in May and then we did not meet again until October. We had tried to meet in September and we just had conflict after conflict. So I guess my first question is, do people want to try to meet, say, for example, in June? That would have to be another webcast because we're not going to be able to get a facility. The schools are closed. My suggestion would be to try to meet again in September. Mondays and Thursdays seem to work best right now, so I'm moving forward in my calendar to September, and pardon me just a second here. I went a little too far. Yeah. We would have to rule out September 7th because that is Labor Day. We would have to rule out September 28th because that is Yom Kippur. But I don't see any other significant conflicts. So what would people prefer, meeting on a Monday or a Thursday at this point? Or is there another day of the week that works for people?
Mr. Chair, June Tierney here.
Go ahead.
I am agnostic on whether it's a Monday or a Thursday. I have very strong views about whether we're meeting in person or not. I don't see us meeting in person anytime soon. So we need to get used to this format, if you ask me, and that should open a few dates up if the panel wants to use it, because it's much easier for me to participate when we're participating in this manner, as opposed to having a 2-hour drive down and back to get to the NDCAP meeting. That's just my 2 cents.
Okay, and I'll be honest, I'm on the opposite end of that spectrum, and I really wish everything would reopen right now. But
somehow I'm not surprised.
yeah, I'm a capitalist. I'm sorry.
Well, I wouldn't concede that I'm not a capitalist, but I've been eating, living, and breathing COVID-19 response, as have many people in leadership positions in the state, and I'm not going to be somebody who's giving back any of the governor's gains. So I'm staying safe, and I want everybody else to stay safe too.
So I got a couple suggestions popping up on the screen. One is September 22nd. The only concern that I have September 21st. The only concern that I have is that seems kind of far out. Looking at Thursdays, as Anthony had mentioned, would the 3rd work for people, the 3rd of September?
Josh, may I say something?
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
For those legislators, we're talking about having to be back in session for sometime in August and September, which we will not know about for a while. But I do know that Mondays will always be a free day for me. So if it comes to pass, so I could potentially say okay for a Thursday, but it would be a little bit harder for me to be able to say with complete confidence.
Okay. If Mondays work better for you folks, because you will be in session at that point, how does the 21st work for everybody? That was one of the suggestions. My only concern is that the length of time it is away from today. But if we don't have anything pressing, which it doesn't seem like we do, anything we need to make decisions on, September 21st is an option. What do we think about that?
Bob Leach here. I don't have a problem with it.
We can have our issues committee meeting, at which point I will re-enter a discussion about the future of the spent fuel at Vermont Yankee.
Okay, so that settles it. Let's make September 21st our next NDCAP meeting.
Mr. Chair, I have a comment.
Yes,
question,
go ahead.
Request.
Sure.
So I want to thank Tony for putting this meeting together. There's a lot of people here. Facilitating these types of meetings is incredibly difficult. This is in no means a comment on Tony's work, but I have been participating in nonstop virtual meetings through all bunches of mediums, and this was by far the worst quality. I would like to suggest that we go to GoToMeeting, or the state is using Microsoft Teams. If Zoom is not a possibility, the legislature is using Zoom. So just something to think about. It doesn't need to be debated here. I just offer that as hopefully something to be considered for the next meeting. I agree it should be planned to be virtual just in case.
Okay, Anthony and I will work together on that particular issue. I agree this was a little cumbersome, but honestly, this is the first virtual meeting that I've had throughout this whole COVID thing, because I've been working 60 hours a week, so in person. So this is my first experience with any of this type of thing through the COVID. So Anthony and I will work for a better solution going forward. And I think that is it. We'll send an email out regarding the Issues Committee meeting prior to the September 21st meeting, and go from there. Does anybody else have anything from the general public, comments to the panel?
Okay, all lines to the public should be unmuted.
Kevin Camps, if you unmute yourself, we can hear you.
Okay, Kevin, try it now.
How about he type the question, Tony?
Hello, can you hear me now?
There it goes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is Kevin Camps with Beyond Nuclear, and I just had a couple of questions. I tried to ask them earlier, but couldn't get through, and I had a couple brief comments. I'll keep it brief. The questions I had were regarding a Susan Smallher article in the Brattleboro, Vermont newspaper, The Reformer, back on March 2nd, that described NorthStar getting a waiver from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission regarding how long it takes for the waste shipments to travel to Texas. It was an increase from something like 20 days to 60 days. And my specific question, I guess, would be what takes so long for that train journey? And a related question is, are these rail cars resting in rail yards for long periods of time? And if so, what kind of dose rate is being given off? Because the workers in those rail yards or residents nearby would be exposed to that dose rate that whole time. That's one question. A second question, I guess, for NorthStar as well is, has the radiological surveying where you said nothing surprising has been found, unexpected, has that yet extended to where those leaks were taking place back in like early 2010, late 2009, the underground pipes that were leaking? Those are my questions. My quick comments. I was really concerned to hear the advocacy or the support for the Yucca dump in Nevada and even for the consolidated interim storage facilities. So I'm speaking on behalf of our members and supporters in Vermont and New Hampshire and Massachusetts who are directly impacted up there. But I just have to point out that Yucca is not going to happen. I mean, as was said, the state of Nevada and the Western Shoshone Indian Nation and many others are adamantly opposed, have been for 33 years. It was mentioned the Western Shoshone land title. That's going to be a bit of a problem to overcome, for one thing. But on consolidated interim storage as well, Beyond Nuclear has a lawsuit against both the Texas proposal and the New Mexico proposal because it violates the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, and that's going to court. And we're joined by others, a coalition of environmental groups across the country in the host states. Just to name one, the Sierra Club, the biggest environmental group in the country, is opposed to these proposals. So I just wanted to get that out there as a concern, and really you can't depend on those anytime soon. That's why hardened on-site storage for the foreseeable future is the only way to go. Thank you.
Okay, so Corey, I'll turn it over to you to answer the couple questions at the beginning of Mr. Camp's statement.
All right, the first question with respect to the waiver has to do with the reporting requirements. Whenever a shipment leaves by rail, the reporting requirements are that we track that and we know where it is at all times, and it should arrive at its destination within 20 days. If it does not, we file a report with the NRC saying we understand where that material and shipment has been and why, and where we are in Vermont and where the waste facility is in Texas. We're about as far across the country as we can get. And unfortunately, we were learning that 20 days regularly does get exceeded, and it has mostly to do with the rail operations. But the postings and the placarding and the controls for all the materials and the shipments are in compliance with all DOT regulations. And where those shipments are and the rail yards go, I can't give you a definitive answer for the exact dose rates that any member of the public would receive, but it is within the Code of Federal Regulations governed under 10 CFR 39 and the Department of Transportation rules for shipping materials like the ones that are being shipped. So it's really a reporting requirement. We extended that periodicity to 45 days, and we've been able to meet the rail turnaround time for that. But to answer your question, yes, rail traffic is complicated. Sometimes trains do get stopped, broken up, recoupled, and shipped part way. And often it does take longer than 20 days to get a rail shipment from Vermont to Texas. As far as the second question goes, there is significant monitoring around the area where the tritium leakage from the condensate drain lines did put water into the ground back in 2009 and 10. A good component of that area has extensive monitoring. The well that Dr. Irwin specifically asked about, GZ10, and sample data for it, which we'll find out about and get some information in. There's no source term there anymore, and we have seen an extremely appreciable degradation in tritium values ever since the plant shut down, and actually well before that when we did all the mitigation efforts with the half-life of tritium. The values of those, for the most part, all the wells that are outside of those areas, we've seen well below the drinking water standards. So to answer the question fully, we have seen an expected reduction in the tritiation of the water that's in the ground in that area. And in most cases, it's down to non-detectable or well below the drinking water standards. I think I got this question, but I'm open to follow up if I missed anything.
No, thank you. I guess in addition to the tritium contamination, I remember there being other forms of radioactive contamination. I don't remember the exact isotopes, but there were several, I think. So are you going to do more extensive testing of that area where the leakage was, or is that well the only testing that you're doing?
Some of the wells that are associated with that are in the groundwater monitoring sampling program for our radiological samples, so that's an ongoing process. But for specific radiological constituents, I'm not familiar with what you're describing, and I'm not sure how to answer a question that's not defined.
Okay, is there any additional public comments or questions?
I thought we had another one coming in. I'm scrolling back to see.
I don't see any. I've been paying attention to it as well.
No, I'm not seeing anything else.
All right, very good. So I make a motion to adjourn.
Actually, I do have one thing I'd like to say.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, everyone, thank you for bearing with the Skype meeting this evening. With regards to using Teams, Teams more or less has the same interface as this, so I do not think that's a viable option. I suspect that some of you heard me swearing when the entire interface on my laptop disappeared in the middle of the meeting, so I thought the entire meeting had crashed. So my apologies for the unprofessionalism there. I'm not sure what we can do to make this a little bit easier. If we can go back to GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar, I would certainly be willing to do that. I was much happier with that setup than Skype. Zoom is a possibility, assuming I can get it installed on my work laptop. However, what I see on that is unless we pay some additional money for it, the meetings all cut off at 30 minutes, which would not work here. So that may be a reason to tap some of the funding that NorthStar has offered. But thank you very much, everyone.
I'll second Josh's motion.
Very good. So moved and seconded to adjourn. Let's see. Let's go down. Well, we probably don't need to go down through the list. Please unmute yourself and say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.